Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Poetry. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a poem called Hide and Seek by Vernon Scannell. Now, he was a writer of the 20th century, really interesting man. He wrote memoirs and poems and novels. He had experiences in World War II. He actually deserted and got in trouble, was arrested later on in life for that. And for that reason, some of his poetry, whether it's about war, he does write about war, but he also writes about kind of domestic life. But there is always this sort of sense of conflict. Now, this particular poem that we're looking at, Hide and Seek, is all about the idea of sort of disappointment as you start to grow up. The poem is written in the second person, almost like instructions of how to play hide and seek, but they tell a really specific story of a narrator that is left in a shed hiding and then, comes out thinking he's the winner to find that actually he's been abandoned. And the whole thing really works as a metaphor for life and disappointments. And it also sparks ideas about what choices you make, what you take part in, what you're missing out of. That's a little bit of the summary for you, but for now, let's get started with some analysing. Okay, so let's start with the beginning, with the title, in fact. So Hide and Seek, obviously it's a very well-known children's game. So it immediately introduces the childhood tone and that kind of sense of nostalgia. It's a very kind of inclusive concept that everyone will sort of recognise. Now, the actual poem begins on media res, which means in the midst of things. So straight off, we've got this direct address, these imperatives that sort of suggest that there's like a set of rules, almost like standardized rules of the game. Call out, call loud. And then we move into direct speech. I'm ready, come and find me. So it's kind of like the system of playing, the rules of playing, which ties into the idea about, the notion of the game being a metaphor for life and growing up, this idea that there are rules to the way that we live. And then we move into this very sensory description. The sacks in the tool shed smell like the seaside. So we've got this simile here, and we're really getting a kind of almost like nostalgic tone, because even though we're in the present tense, you sort of get the idea of almost like an adult looking back at this. There's a really interesting kind of narrative perspective. They'll never find you in this salty dark. So we've got this idea of there's a kind of sense of excitement and pride with this speaker. They'll never find you, slightly hyperbolic, I suppose. But what I quite like is this metaphor continuing on the sea imagery, the idea of the salty dark, whilst continuing with the senses, because we're getting the sense of taste here. But be careful that your feet aren't sticking out. So we've got more imperatives here. So again, reminding us of the rules. And there's a kind of sense of sort of pride in being sneaky. And then we've got some elliptical phrasing. So elliptical phrasing is where you miss out some of the words that are technically needed to make it a grammatically sound sentence. Wiser not to risk another shout, rather than saying it would be wise not to risk another shout, or it is wiser. So that's why it's called elliptical phrasing, because you're sort of taking bits out. But here we got the sense of him being really excited. It's a kind of the idea of like running thoughts going through the narrator's mind. And note the way that this narrator, this sort of childhood narrator, is giving instructions almost like to the reader to say this is how you do it, whilst also almost like it's almost like he's sort of speaking to his childhood self. It's very interesting. Okay, continuing on. So we've got present tense again. Now we're in a declarative mode. So no more of these imperatives, just in this little moment. And we're still continuing with the sensory imagery, the idea of feeling now. The floor is cold, but that adjective cold perhaps is the beginnings of this kind of sense of doubt eking through the poem, the sort of negativity, this idea that there is discomfort in this game. They'll probably be searching the bushes near the swing. So again, you've got the adverb probably here, again suggesting a bit of doubt, but you could also argue that it's like reassurance. So, oh, the floor is cold, but off, you know, they're losing, I'm winning. There could be a sense of reassurance there as well. Whatever happens, you mustn't sneeze when they come prowling in. So again, you get this kind of sense of pride in the skill. This is a rehearsed game. The narrator is drawing upon previous experience, perhaps has sneezed at some point when someone's come in to find him. But what I'm quite interested in is this verb, metaphorical verb. They come prowling in. It makes them, the wider group of people doing the looking, because it's they, not an individual, sound almost like predatory, like hunters. So it sort of escalates the stakes. And here they are, whispering at the door. So note that we're in present tense, present continuous here with the whispering. Slightly onomatopoeic, whispering at the door. So you get this real sense of anticipation. Are they going to go in? Are they going to find him? You've never heard them sound so hushed before. So slightly hyperbolic again, like they've never been so quiet. Now, there are a couple of different interpretations here. That you've got the notion that perhaps they just haven't realised, you know, that he's in there, but the fact that they're whispering, some people might read that as in the people are kind of almost like plotting or trying to decide whether to go in or not, which would have a bit of a bearing on the end of the poem, but we'll get to that. Here we've got another an example of one of Scannell's rhyming couplets. Again, I think so they're kind of littered throughout. There's no fixed rhyme scheme in this poem, but when we get here they are whispering at the door, you've never heard them sound so hushed before. Again, there's that sense of anticipation and excitement. Okay, speaking of anticipation and excitement, look at these imperatives. Don't breathe, don't move, stay dumb. Now, if you want a fancy word, you could call this syntactic parallelism, which basically means that you've got sentences, even though they're not repeating the words, it's the same sort of structure. So the fact that we've got a succession of two-word simple sentences that are all imperative. So it's like the syntax, the order of the sentences is the same. But you could also just say that Scannell uses a series of short imperative sentences that creates a sort of sense of drama in this moment. What I think is really interesting is this metaphor, this kind of symbolic moment. Hide in your blindness. So obviously it's dark, that's why he's blind. But perhaps blindness could be symbolic for the idea of innocence or ignorance, as in so not having worldly knowledge, i.e. innocent, or being ignorant, i.e. not understanding the world and what's going on around him. And again, that ties in nicely with the overall extended metaphor and the end of the poem. They're moving closer. Someone stumbles, mutters. Their words and laughter scuffle. So we've got little bits of onomatopoeic language here. The stumble, the mutter, mutter, sounds like someone speaking quietly. Their words and laughter scuffle. So we've got this personification now of the idea of them talking and then laughing, and it all kind of like bouncing together and bumping into each other. But what I think is interesting is this juxtaposition between the narrator alone in the shed and this kind of unity on the outside. So I've sort of said like individual versus the group. Now, the fact that they're gone, that they don't actually open the door and come through, could be, so one interpretation is that they just decide not to and go off to look somewhere else or hide somewhere else. But you could read it as sort of deliberately excluding. It's possible. I'm not sure if that's what he was intending, but you could read it that way. The idea of them all kind of giggling outside and then leaving this child. And I think the kind of drama of "and they're gone" perhaps could back that up. You know, so if you want to talk about that, you know, offer up two interpretations and hedge it with perhaps this could be. On the other hand, it could also be. Now, we've got this sort of sense of doubt being built up, yeah, for us as a reader kind of looking at what's going on. But our narrator, it's almost like they're trying to create a sense of confidence and security. So we go back to the imperatives, the instructions, don't come out just yet. And then we've got modal verbs. They'll try the lane, as in they will try the lane. So there's a sort of sense of certainty. No, you're still winning the game. That they're going to be out doing this, that, and the other. You know, they're going to try the lane and then the greenhouse. And back here again, suggesting once more that there's this kind of rehearsed behaviour. And then we get this sort of sense of irony, because obviously he is completely unaware of what's actually happening. They must be thinking that you're very clever, getting more puzzled as they search all over. Well, unfortunately, the reality is that either they've deliberately excluded him, or they've forgotten about him and have gone off to do something else. Because, you know, in a moment we're going to get the sense of, you know, like time passing. So there is a kind of like bitter irony here in this child naively not understanding the situation that they're in. So we've got a shift in tone here. Definitely, it's much more marked, you know, from that kind of sense of, you know, security and confidence to actually feelings of discomfort. It seems a long time since they went away. Note that verb seems, again suggesting uncertainty. Your legs are stiff. The cold bites through your coat. Lovely metaphor there. Quite zoomorphic in nature, but the idea of even layers are not enough to protect him. There's still that negative force getting through. The dark, damp smell of sand moves in your throat. Note how both of those lines are so monosyllabic. Yeah, they're all monosyllabic words. So there's a kind of simplicity in this moment, and it continues to be sensory descriptions, but there's a kind of much more of a negativity, almost like all of these sort of vivid senses are overwhelming him. The cold biting through, the smell moving in his throat. Note the plosive alliteration there of dark, damp, and then smell of sand. We've got the sibilants there as well, so really, really vivid in description. And then, bless narrator, again, you're getting this almost sense of like forced confidence here. It's time to let them know that you're the winner, like a kind of planned celebration. Push off the sacks, uncurl and stretch. So imperatives again, giving instructions. This is how to do it. That's better. So you've got this exclamative again, suggesting excitement. Out of the shed and call to them. I've won, here I am, come and own up, I've caught you. So we've got dialogue again, or direct speech, just like we had at the very, very beginning of the poem. So it's kind of like, it's marking the end of the game. It's not quite cyclical narrative because it's not the very end of the poem, but it's the beginning and the end of the game. You know, the come and find me, and then down to come and own up, I've caught you. So yeah, it marks the end of this moment, and you can argue one way or the other. You can say this really is excitement demonstrated through these exclamatives, which would suggest the child's complete naivety, or you can say that it's sort of forced, that they're trying to muster up that same excitement. And then the end of the poem is so sad. The darkening garden watches. So we get a real sense of time having passed here, and it's not just time passing, but there's a kind of growing realization. So you've got the personification of the garden watching, observing this reaction. Nothing stirs. So lovely bit of caesura in the middle of the line, followed by this short sentence, nothing stirs, very declarative in nature. You could argue almost that it sort of echoes that stillness in the moment just there. More personification in the bushes hold their breath. So again, you've got this sense of anticipation, but it's no longer about winning, it's about realizing. The sun is gone, everything's dark, the person is alone. And I think there's a sort of like slight sense of bitterness in this moment of understanding that yes, here you are. Here you are, but where are they who sought you? So ending on a rhetorical question. And it's this idea, so I said right at the very beginning of the video that this is all like a big extended metaphor, that this game of hide and seek is like life. And life comes with expectations and rules and naivety and sometimes overconfidence. And it also comes with disappointments and realizations and negative feelings. There's this idea about missed opportunities. So what did this child miss whilst desperately trying to win? What did they miss outside? I think it's all wrapped up in this idea of growing up and sort of realizing, understanding that not everything is as it seems, and you always have these expectations, but sometimes you're faced with massive disappointment. Gosh, so many of these poems are so depressing. Sorry. Little note on form, very easy. So it's one big old stanza, 27 lines, and that kind of works because it fits with the idea of like a dramatic monologue as well. It's certainly in free verse. Any rhyming in there is sporadic. It's not a fixed pattern. What you're more likely to see is rhyming couplets, and quite often when it's showing a sort of sense of either childhood excitement or perhaps naivety. What's particularly interesting about the form is the narrative perspective and the way that it's set out as in moments first person in the dialogue, but then you have this direct address, this second person perspective, but you could say it's like someone giving instructions, but really it feels in my mind like a person looking back at their child self and speaking to him, like sort of recounting the rules and the experience to him. It's also, as I said before, you've got dialogue in there, but it's like the dialogue of the game. It fits into the idea of the rules of the game. It's a very interesting poem. Right, that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. Got any questions or queries or disagree or agree? Please get in touch in the comments and I will do my best to respond to you. Hope everything's going well. Happy revising.